What's up, it's your boy Hobo Drobo, and today I want to go over how I approach all of my matches in Kingdom Rush battles. First we'll start with Onslaught and then we'll get into Stadium, because as of where the game is right now, they're both very different. I'll have a timestamp if you just want to go over the Stadium stuff, and then I'll also have links in the description of this video if you want to see how I play the Archmage and Necromancer decks more in depth. Otherwise, let's waste no more time, and let's go over how I approach Onslaught in our first match against Dense Queen here. I've said many times before that I believe this game shines in Onslaught because you get a new map every day and you have to cater your deck and your strategy to that map. And so something that I found out over the course of the last few days is that this Necromancer deck will struggle on some maps, but then it will completely take over on others. And so one of the reasons I really like this deck is that you can also switch your strategy based on the map that you're playing. And so, for example, on this map, I found that Frost Giants were more effective, when on the other maps, it was the Verdant Dogs that threw my opponents off. And so, since the Verdant Dogs weren't as good on this map, I actually swapped in Musketeers instead to give me some extra firepower against bosses, or to pick off the stragglers that are coming out of those portals late, if my opponent is using something like the Necromancer or the Ghost Booster. And that's mainly because I'm paying attention to what boosters are also offered on this map. It's not just the map layout, but it's also the boosters that you have to be able to take care of. And so on some Onslaught maps, there's going to be, let's say, a lot of magic resistant troops, and you have to be ready for that, which is why I like the Musketeers. But then there may be a lot of troops that have no magic resistance, and then you can spam magic towers. And so you just have to be very careful and pay attention to that after you have a few matches and you have some experience with it. So now once you understand the map you're playing, and you understand what deck you're going to use to cater to your strategy, it's time to think about what your opponent has once you actually get into the match. And so for personal preference, especially in an Onslaught, I always prefer the boosters that send a troop towards my opponent, and I try to do something that'll counter them. So if my opponent is using something like an Ice Scald or Barasat, I try to send a Call of the Dragon their way, or a Thunderbird, something that dragons have a hard time dealing with, like air troops. So those air boosters are very valuable. Even the hot air balloons in this is what I was trying to go for, but I'm not able to get them up high enough level to really do anything. So as long as I can get different kind of boosters going, it makes it difficult for them to keep up, and at least buys you time in those Onslaught matches to be able to take care of the things on your side as well. Because Onslaught, it's really a time battle compared to Stadium. Now, you've addressed what your opponent has, you've seen what towers they have, you're trying to pick a booster that counters their towers or their heroes, and now you're in the middle rounds like you see here. What are you going to do? And so this is where you can start to do one of three things. You can either focus on disrupting your opponent by buying upgrades like tar missiles or sniper shots, or you can try and focus on your own defense and get those towers up so that you can maximize killing everything on your board, or you can balance it and do a little bit of both. And so oftentimes it'll be a balance of both, where you and your opponent are both trying to get your defenses up, making sure you can survive. You may get one or two disruption abilities here and there, and it can really depend on the moment. So like if I see that the Barasat is really low and he could die to sniper shots, then I'm going to buy that sniper shots if I have the chance to take him out. Little things like that can definitely make or break rounds. Make sure you're planning ahead. Make sure you have a spell cycle that's consistent enough to be able to take care of things. Another thing that I do in these rounds is that my spell cycle is very consistent, although I have to make sure that sometimes I'm splitting it up depending on what boosters are sent my way. And so I'd really like to highlight what Dense Queen is doing here. They're doing a really good job of just balancing out their entire board. So am I. We're all taking care of things very fast, and the boosters are very similar, so we have around the same things we have to take care of. And so this is definitely a good example of that balanced approach. However, on some maps, with like the Verdant Dogs, for example, when I have those ranger hideouts, I want to go fast. I want to be knocking lives off my opponent instantly. And if you want to see a good example of that, go check out my Release the Wolves video. So we're approaching the middle of round 5, and now you really want to start thinking about that boss. It's really important to know what bosses have what resistances. So for example, the Chum Bucket here is what I like to call him, is a magic resistant boss, and so you're going to want to make sure that you have archer towers or even something like an arcane that can take away that magic resistance. Something like Sabotage, for example, that spell can take away magic resistance, and so that can help you on these bosses a lot. But I prefer the strategy where I like to stall them out, keep them in choke points where a lot of towers are firing at the boss at once, and so that's my strategy going into this. However, this isn't my setup for the boss, and that's also very important. So my setup for the boss is going to be only really noticeable in the middle of round 6 once I start selling towers. Now that we're in rounds 5 and 6, don't be afraid, and even if you have to do it earlier, don't be afraid to sell towers and change things when you need. For example, I went for the Ice Storm over the Frost Giant because he has an Archmage. But for this match, you'll see that I want to have those towers in the beginning upgraded, at least that Musketeer there, because it's going to get a lot of early damage and allow it to clear for some of those troops that are coming down. And then once the boss reaches that middle area, that's really when I want to start selling everything, especially the towers that aren't in range of any troops. Even if there's like a few stragglers, like, you see some of those wolves going through, and that'll happen throughout this round, I'll be able to stall everything in the middle, so it's not really going to matter if they can't hit them. So now you'll see I'm going to sell those Necromancers and buy the Musketeers, as well as get those archery scouts in the back, because like the Barbarians, they're really good at hitting air troops, although since they're actually archery scouts, they have a lot more range, and it's very noticeable on a map like this when I'm stalling it in that choke point right in the middle. And so the boss does have a lot of health right now, and I need to make sure that I'm stalling, stunning, putting the icy zone down, doing anything that I can to make sure that that chum bucket is moving very slow. But as long as I can make sure it's moving slow, I'm able to get those Musketeers up. I'm starting to get some of the upgrades for it, and they're just going to slowly start picking away at the boss. And here I am a little bit worried, although you can see their chum bucket is moving really quick through there as well. And so it's going to come down really close to the wire in this one, where selling those towers and buying the Musketeers really made a big difference. And you can see I'm afraid of Allura dying here, so I micro her out of the way, although now she's not getting any damage, and it's so close, and I'm afraid that, oh no, I may have sold by not microing Allura there, and now she's just walking over. However, I'm able to get her there, she's able to get a little bit more damage, and we get a win by near inches. So GG Dense Queen, this was an awesome Onslaught match. And so in Onslaught, all the cards are the same level, and it makes it very easy to be able to prepare for a specific map, although let's see the opposite of that with Stadium and how I approach setting up a match for this game mode. But before we hop into the Stadium map with chat member Utano, I believe is how you say it here, I wanted to show off the Dragon Bonds that I was able to pull on him, where like I was saying yesterday, if you're able to get them very high level very quickly, it's almost impossible to deal with them. And so I caught him off guard, he hits me with the well played, and we get a nice sneaky win in that round 1. However, he was using Necromancer, and I don't think he was expecting to run into me there, so I wanted to give him another fair chance and try and match up with him again. And so after he makes some adjustments and a few more matches, we come up to this one that's really close, and so this is a perfect example of how we prepared our decks for Stadium. Now for this match, Utano and I are actually using the exact same deck. However, although he has 1 level on my Barasad, I have a lot of levels on his towers as well as his spells, so I feel like overall I definitely have the advantage in this matchup. But Utano knows me, I'm always preaching stay resilient regardless of what the matchup is like, and so I like that Utano did adjust his strategy over time, and it's very apparent in this matchup that it became a lot closer. So let's approach how I went into these Stadium matches. And the first thing is creating a deck. Now, when you want to create a deck for Stadium, it's very important to notice your card levels, obviously, but it's also important to know the rarity. So in this deck, we're both using 3 common towers, being the Dwarven Artillery, the Musketeer, and the Barbarians. And while his aren't high enough level compared to mine to be as effective, it's important to note that with these common cards, it's the easiest to get these cards, and so you're going to be able to get these cards up to level 9 and level 10 more naturally than you're going to be able to get your rares or your epics, and especially your legendaries. So if you're struggling based on levels, try to find a deck that has a lot of common cards, because you can find some really effective strategies where as long as you have the goal to upgrade those cards, you'll probably also have the cards to do so. And so once you've figured out what common cards or rare cards you want to put in your deck, it's important to then to figure out what the gimmick of your deck is. And so for here, it's Archmage. And what's good about having a gimmick card, or let's say your win condition, if you're familiar with Clash Royale, for example, the Archmage is going to be my win condition because in those later rounds, I'm using its Dissipate upgrade to send troops from my side to my opponent. And that's going to be how I generate most of my wins. And so the reason why it's really important to have a win condition in Stadium decks is that you have to be prepared for every single map in the game. And so Archmage I feel pretty confident about using on every single map in the game compared to something like Necromancer, where I know it's going to be weak on a lot of maps, and overall that's just going to make it a lot more difficult for me to get wins on different maps. So that's why I like what I have here. I'm able to use this spell lineup in a lot of different situations. And so I'm able to upgrade these cards as well as use them consistently on every single map that I get for Stadium. And that makes it so that when I'm queuing, I'm not worried about getting something that I'm not going to be able to be prepared for. So to sum that up, you basically just want to limit what is out of your control. You don't have control over what map you're going to get, what boosters you have to prepare for, and so you have to feel confident going into those Stadium matches that you have a deck that's prepared for most, if not all, situations. And since there isn't really a deck in the game that can prepare for every situation, don't beat yourself up if you go against a matchup that's heavily out of your favor. That's just something that happens in stuff like Clash Royale. You're not going to get every single matchup, although you shouldn't then just instantly quit if you see a matchup that you're not prepared well against. Like I said, be resilient and try to get better, because those are the matches that make you a better player. When you're going up against something that you know you don't have the favor in, you want to give it your best shot. And so the reason I like Barrisad in Stadium over something like Allure is because Barrisad also helps you produce more gold, and that gold is definitely more noticeable in Stadium, where it's lacking overall compared to a game mode like Onslaught, where they're really giving you a lot to work with. And so you have to be a little bit more careful with what you're upgrading in Stadium, what towers you're placing down, because it's going to be noticeable that you're getting less gold. Now for most Stadium maps, I really want to prioritize getting towers that counter the boosters, because I need to be able to survive those heavy Wave 5 and Wave 6 rounds, and the boosters are going to make it really difficult for me to do so if I'm not prepared for them. And sometimes that means sacrificing my win condition, and this is very important for winning me a lot of Stadium maps, where the maps are very difficult in general to defend, and so I'm focusing getting something up like a Musketeer that has a lot of range over something like the Mage Tower, where they're just not getting enough value in those early rounds. That's different when you're playing Onslaught, where you are getting a lot of value in those early rounds. You have to be a lot more selective in Stadium. And so during these rounds 1 through 4 in Stadium matches, I'm very, very rarely buying upgrades that can disrupt my opponent, like tar missiles or sniper shots. It's only if I'm getting a gold advantage, or the map just so happens to produce more gold, or if I'm like getting something like a bandit shield where they're feeding me bandits to get more gold. It's very rare situations where I'm actually getting those kind of upgrades early. So I want to prioritize my defense. I want to just play it like any other Kingdom Rush game, where I'm just defending everything on my side, and then once rounds 5 and 6 come, your opponent is probably doing the same thing, and now it's time to start exchanging as much disruption as you can. And so while Archmage is my primary win condition, there are some maps like this one where I just have to focus the Musketeers and I have to focus the artillery. And so instead, I'm not going to invest in the Dissipate upgrade, but I'll just buy the sniper shots and the tar missiles to at least disrupt my opponent while getting a lot of damage on my side as well. It heavily depends on the map, and that's why even if you have the same deck for every single map, you want to adjust your strategy depending on what's going on. And so since this game can kind of feel like slot machines at times, that's why I do like Onslaught a little bit better, because it's minimizing what's out of your control. And if you were able to swap to one of your other deck presets before hopping into that Stadium match when you see the map, I think that could eliminate some of the RNG. And I think it would also incentivize people to upgrade different cards. That's something that Clash Royale actually doesn't have, because in Clash Royale it's the same map every time. And so that's why this game really stands out to me, because it's not just going to be one deck for the meta. Every single day there can be a new meta, and that's something that you could almost find in no other PvP game like this. It's just so interesting, and there's so much potential, and so that's basically the way I approach these matches. Is there's so much going on and there's so much I have to know beforehand, that if you do feel like you're struggling, really try and pay attention to what's going on in each map. And I'm hoping to come to you guys later and break down each map, and that's what I try and do in a lot of these replay videos, is I try and go over each map and the replay specifically to show you guys how I'm approaching it and how I'm changing my ideology throughout the map depending on what my opponent is doing. And so while numbers are very important, I feel like you guys know me by now, and that I'm more of a situational person, and I try and see what am I using and how is it actually working in real time, even if the numbers don't really speak and tell that full story. So I want to give a shout out again to the Ironhide team, the Balance team for the beta, because for somebody who's only experienced this since launch, I feel like the game is fairly balanced for the most part. It's not perfect, but there's nothing that really screams out to me thinking that like, okay, this is a red flag, especially after those first initial balance changes. I think those were really good. besides the current free-to-play progression as well as Summon Rift, but that's a whole other topic for another day. And to be fair, they said that they're not going to nerf Necromancer in the next patch. And while I do feel like progression balance is different than actual in-game balance, I understand how much those levels for Stadium impact the game. There's also just a lot of little things, like this game feels really good from a mechanical standpoint. When I'm playing the game, it doesn't feel like there's anything that's like, it makes me feel like I'm getting thrown off my game. I'm not accidentally clicking anything, I'm not accidentally selling towers, accidentally doing upgrades, and you can see that there was probably a lot of work put into making sure that experience feels natural and it feels smooth overall. And so I think that that's also something that we have to give Ironhide some credit for, especially for a day one launch, as well as all the beta testers. Shout out to you guys, because I feel like the game is in a pretty good spot and it just needs a lot more to be able to elevate it to where it could be. But I'm very much a foundational person, and so I'm willing to give Ironhide the time to flesh things out and polish it, and hopefully we can see a lot of those things that people wanted on the initial launch added in the future. And so that's basically how I approach these matches, as well as just the game overall. A lot of it is, I want to bring you guys my strategies and hopefully it can help you guys in your own matches, but I also just want to have fun with it. I said in one of my earlier videos is that I'm just trying to have fun as well. And so a lot of these games for me is just, I see funny characters running around the screen and I want to shoot them down with other funny characters. So it's not always taken too seriously. But I do see the depth and I do see the vision that this game has, and I want to see it become the best it can possibly be. So if you agree or you got anything out of this video, drop a like, or if you didn't and you disagree with me, drop a dislike. There's no hard feelings. But if you do enjoy these videos and you aren't subscribed yet, then what are you waiting for? Maybe it's because you're an Ashbite main. I don't blame you. Actually, never mind, nobody's an Ashbite main, what am I talking about? Anyways, GG Utano and GG Dense Queen. You guys had some awesome matches, and I cannot wait to play more of you guys when custom matches come. But until then, good luck in your next battles, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.